Hi, this is Mike from Smashing 50 with a little podcast recording with Brad Walker, the stretch coach, and we're talking all about training for a 10K today. So if you're starting off at zero or you're very you're not moving very much at all, and you're in the challenge and you're going to, over the next 10 weeks, we're going to be training through the training plan for our 10K. Then there are certain things that you really need to be thinking about in terms of injury prevention, keeping yourself fit and healthy for the duration. And so I've got with me Brad Walker, who is he's a stretch coach, and he's probably the best source of information on movement and injury and stretching that I can think of. So welcome, Brad.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. Always good to talk with you. I know we've chatted a few times in the past and we've always had some interesting discussions. So, looking forward to having another good talk today.
Great, yeah. And I'm really interested in you getting, your knowledge out to these guys who are, who are doing this 10K in these 10 weeks. So, they've started off already and they haven't moved very much yet. We've been doing a little bit of walking, jogging, but we're going to start moving a bit more now. Now we're into week 2. We're going to be starting to do a little bit more running, 15 minutes of running. And so I just want to get your real professional input really on. So if we can start with, what do you think the benefits of running are to, especially, guys who are middle-aged? You think, how can they see themselves improve over this next 10 weeks, do you think?
Yeah, look, running has a lot of benefits to it. I mean, the sort of obvious ones are things like improved cardiovascular fitness, improved aerobic fitness, things like weight loss as well. Also, running is a weight-bearing activity, so it's also very good for strengthening the bones and joints and that sort of stuff as well. So there's a lot of benefits that go along with running, and as long as you're careful and avoid injury, then running is a great source of exercise for anyone of any age.
I think as well, it's becoming a little bit more well known now that the mental benefits of running are really quite high as well. All kinds of information coming out about mental health and about how running. I mean, for me, running is about positivity as well. It helps me set new goals, and those endorphins that you get when you finish a good run, it always makes you feel better. So I think as well as those kind of physical benefits, there are also a lot of mental benefits as well. So for me, like, running it's one of those easy things you can do as well, isn't it? It's not like you have to depend on anything apart from you put your shoes on and you find half an hour and you go. So I think for busy parents as well, it's also a really good sport to get into. So, but what might be the risks to these new runners then, who are training for 10 weeks to get to 10K? What kind of risks are they looking at?
Yeah, well, running certainly does have its fair share of injuries and ailments that go along with it. So there's certainly some things that new runners need to look out for. I often talk with people about, injury prevention and so forth. And sometimes I tell them about, the differences between, muscle and tendon and joints and bones and so forth, just to give people an idea of how the body responds to exercise. And a lot of people aren't aware that, muscle adapts very quickly to exercise. So whenever you start any type of exercise, whether it's running or going to the gym or riding or playing tennis, your muscles adapt really quickly and they get stronger really quickly. So it gives you this sort of false sense that you can do more, that you can run further, run faster, etc. The problem is that all the other parts of your body take a lot longer to adapt. So things like, your tendons, your ligaments, the joints, the joint capsule, your bones, etc. They take a lot longer to adapt. So what often happens is, people start running, after those first few weeks where you get over the sort of, that soreness and stiff muscles and that sort of stuff. And you start to get some momentum, you start to feel good, you start to feel like you can run a little bit further or a little bit faster. Well, that's your muscles adapting to the training that you're doing. What you've got to keep in mind, though, is that the rest of your body, the joints and ligaments and everything, take a little bit longer to catch up. So it's really important that you include some recovery weeks in your training, that you take really careful note of things like little niggly pains and aches, and you treat them as quickly as possible. And just be aware that, even though you may feel like you can do more, it can take longer for all those other parts of your body to catch up. So always keep that in mind. But probably some of the most common sort of things that runners have to deal with, apart from those niggly sort of aches and pains and just sort of general muscle strains, things like knees tend to cause some problems. The other areas that are sort of common with new runners are calf and Achilles type problems. So these are a couple of areas to sort of look out for. And if you find yourself sort of getting any sort of pain or niggles in those areas, then, firstly, back off. And secondly, instigate some treatment sort of options to compensate for those.
Would there be any kind of stretches or anything that they could do to try and help those kind of things? What's the best way that they can kind of avoid those injuries in the first place?
Yeah, look, prevention is always the key. When it comes to running, probably the most important thing a runner can do to prevent injury is work on their technique, work on their form, their biomechanics, and become a better runner. Don't worry so much about becoming faster, especially in the early stages of your training, when you're getting going. Concentrate on being a better runner rather than a faster runner. So if you've got an opportunity to work with a coach, someone who can watch you running and pick up on little things, things like running too upright is a cause of injury. As far as your form and technique is concerned, you want to be in a slightly forward position. So you want to be concentrating on leaning forward. And leaning forward sort of from the ankles, not just leaning forward from the hips where you're sort of bending at the waist, but having a slight lean forward, keeping a nice, good, straight posture, shoulders back, head up, chest out, running sort of chest forward. What are some other things? Relaxed shoulders, trying to run off sort of the midfoot or ball of the foot rather than a heavy heel strike. And it's as I said before, if you can get someone to have a look at your form, it's much easier for someone to sort of pick out what's wrong or, where you can improve your form, rather than you trying to figure it out while you're running along. So by far, working on your technique is going to have the biggest effect on minimizing injury and preventing injury. You notice, all the good runners, they run beautifully when you look at them. They're smooth. They look like they glide along as they run. So that would be my first sort of thing as far as injury prevention is concerned. Concentrate on your form and your technique. And along with your form and technique, the obvious things to work on are things like your core strength. So instigating some sort of strength training regime where you're focusing on your core. For running, things like your lower back, your glutes, your backside, your hamstrings. These are really important muscle groups. A lot of runners have weak, what we call posterior chain, which is the muscles in the back of your body. So as I said before, that lower back, your glutes, your hips, and your hamstrings. They'll help to not only improve your running, but they'll help to keep you in that nice posture, that nice running technique. So if you can instigate, even if it's just sitting on the floor at night and doing 10 minutes of sit-ups and sort of a few back exercises and things like that, that'll have a big effect on your running and your running technique. Again, with this whole technique thing, flexibility is important. Just being able to move freely as a runner is really important. So having good flexibility, and again, working on those muscle groups that I spoke about before, the lower back, glutes, hamstrings, calves, quads and hip flexors are another sort of muscle group that tends to tighten up with runners. So all this sort of contributes to you becoming a better runner. And that's, really important when it comes to injury prevention. Look, there's a lot of other things that go along with helping to prevent injury. Things like hydration. A lot of people don't understand how important hydration is. So staying hydrated, drinking enough fluid. Too much coffee is a real no-no for any sport. It affects a lot of things within the body physically. So too much caffeine can have a very negative effect on the way muscles perform. So limit the caffeine, increase the water intake. Sleep is another big one. Make sure you're getting good quality sleep. This will all help with recovery and repair and rehabilitation, and help with that running consistency so that you can get those miles in.
Good stuff. And what about your thoughts on warming up and cooling down? So we're looking at doing 10K, so roughly about an hour of running. And at the moment, the guys are running about 15 minutes this week. What are your thoughts on them warming up? Should they be warming up? Should they be cooling down? And do you have any specific exercises that you like to do?
Look, because running is one of those activities where unless you're preparing for a race, if you're just going out for a jog, as long as you start off nice and slowly and use maybe the first 5 or 10 minutes of your run as a bit of a warm up to sort of ease into it, that's a great way to sort of ease into your training runs. I usually take the first 5 or 10 minutes of my runs. I'll just run very easy. I might even walk, jog for a little while. You can throw in a few little stretches. Now, the important thing with stretching during the warm-up is you don't want to be doing any intense stretching. So you want to keep your stretching very light, very easy, only holding the stretch for, say, 5 or 6 seconds at a time. So no intense stretching, no long hold stretching, just throwing a little bit of stretching in there to loosen up those areas that are important for running, obviously the hips, the legs, etc. You can incorporate some sort of arm swings, leg swings, that sort of stuff, and then just move into your into whatever run you've got planned for that particular session. If you're preparing for a race, that's another thing. You need to take your warm up a little bit more seriously. But for just those everyday runs where you're going out and doing your training run, as long as you ease into it, like I said, just walk, jog. Maybe throw in a few very easy stretches and then into your sort of main session for the run that you're going to do. Your cool down, on the other hand, you can spend a little bit more time on your cool down. It is really important to let your body sort of come back to that pre-exercise level and give it an opportunity to, to sort of flush out some of those toxins, get your heart rate back down, get your respiratory rate back down. So a cool down is important after your run, and that can consist of simply just 5 minutes of walking, walking nice and gently. Again, you don't want to be doing too much intense stretching during your cool down. Just some very gentle stretching again. A lot of people make the mistake of trying to improve their flexibility during the warm-up and the cool-down. And the warm-up and cool-down is not the time to try and improve your flexibility. All you're doing during the warm-up is just getting your mobility moving a little bit. And during the cool-down, all you're doing with a little bit of stretching is just elongating those muscles out a little bit. When you run, it is an impact sport, so the muscles do tend to tighten up when you run. So the purpose of doing a little bit of stretching during your cool down is just to elongate those muscles out, and again, just return the body to that sort of pre-exercise state.
Excellent. And as we're in a challenge at the moment, the guys are running on a Tuesday, a Thursday and a Sunday. And I think a little bit later there's another day included as well. So they're doing 3 or 4 days of running. And later on, I think from week 4 as well, we'll be introducing some squats and some burpees and some planks and some other things to try and improve, give them a little bit more strength training as well. Do you think that there's space for some more stretching, would you suggest, in that time? And when do you think would be best? Would you stretch on non-running days?
Yeah, for sure. So, mobility and flexibility, range of motion, that is very important as a runner, just as important as things like your cardiovascular fitness and your strength training and your diet and nutrition and all that stuff as well. So it is important that you do set some time aside for that, for working on your flexibility. I mentioned before that I like to sit down at night before going to bed and work on my flexibility training then. So, oftentimes if you tell someone to do even just 10 or 15 minutes of stretching during the day, none of us have got 10 or 15 minutes to sit down and just stretch. So hopefully at the end of the day, you've got an opportunity to relax a little bit more. You're able to sit down. I usually sit down in front of the TV. I like to watch a little bit of comedy or something, and just sit on the floor and do some stretching. Now, I also use the opportunity to work on any little niggles or tight spots that I've noticed through the day or through my training. So not only will I do some stretching, but I'll also do some massage. I have one of those massage sticks that I use, some foam rolling. It's also a really good time to use some foam rolling. Heat packs is another really good thing. So if you do find that you've got a little niggle throughout the day, or you've noticed maybe, the outside of your knees just starting to hurt a little bit, make a mental note of that. Don't ignore it. Make sure you work on that at night time. So sit down, put a heat pack on it for a little while, maybe do some massage on it, and then stretch it out a little bit, maybe some foam rolling as well. So there's a couple of advantages of doing your stretching training late at night before you go to bed. And this is where you would do some more intense stretching. So as opposed to your warm up and cool down where you're just doing very, very gentle, light stretching, this is an opportunity to actually work on your flexibility, to really push your flexibility a little bit, to extend that range of motion. So you're going to do things like, long hold static stretches where you'll get into a stretch position and you'll hold it for sort of 30, 40, 50 seconds, and you'll start to push your flexibility a little bit. Not to the point where it's painful, not to the point where you're hurting yourself, but just to the point where you're getting a good deep stretch and you're holding it for that sort of 30, 40, 50 seconds. So yeah, there's a couple of benefits to doing your stretching late at night. This actually, doing your stretching late at night actually works on a neuromuscular level, because what happens is before you go to sleep, this increased flexibility or this increased range of motion is sort of the last thing your nervous system remembers before going to sleep. So over time, this increased range of motion becomes your new normal from a neuromuscular point of view. So that's a great way to improve your flexibility long term. The other thing is that your body does most of its repairing at night while you're sleeping. So your body is actually repairing itself in that elongated state. So again, that's contributing to your long-term increase in flexibility. So yeah, night time before you go to bed is definitely the best time to work on that stretching and flexibility.
And are there any stretches in particular that runners should be looking at? I mean, for me, I'm sitting on the floor, I'm kind of got my legs out and I'm trying to touch my toes just to stretch my hamstrings out and my glutes and things like that. Are you looking at that kind of the hip area and the legs, of course?
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned before the posterior chain, which is basically all those muscles that run down the back of your body. So with runners, you tend to tighten up in that posterior chain. So the lower back and hamstrings is sort of one of those key areas that tend to tighten up. So just sitting on the floor, legs straight out in front, make sure your toes are facing straight up and down. Don't let them fall out to the side. And then just gently lean forward and just sort of hang in that position, wherever your limit of flexibility is. I know some of the guys out there probably have very limited flexibility. Whatever your level is, whatever your flexibility level isn't important. What is important is that you're working on your flexibility. So don't worry if you can't touch your toes. Don't worry if you can't get down to the floor. Just sit on the floor, legs out in straight, out in front of you. Reach towards your toes. As I said, doesn't matter if you can get anywhere near your toes or not, and just relax in that position. Let your body relax. Let all those muscles loosen up and elongate out. That's a great one. That's gonna sort of target that whole posterior chain. But a couple of other areas you want to work on are your calves. So the calves and Achilles is an area that really can cause a lot of problems with runners. So calf stretches, and it's really important that you do calf stretches both with a straight leg, so keeping your knee straight, and then also doing calf stretches with your knee bent. So that's the calf muscle is actually made up of two separate muscles, and to stretch them both effectively, you need to do a calf stretch with a straight leg and a calf stretch with a bent leg. So they're key areas. The glutes, the backside, is another really important muscle group for runners. So again, sitting on the floor in that sort of position we talked about before, one leg out in front. This time you bend one knee and sort of pull that knee in towards your chest, and that'll focus on that large buttocks muscle, the glutes there. The other area that a lot of runners struggle with is probably the quads and hip flexors. Obviously, that muscle is very important for running. It lifts the leg up as you're coming through your running stride. So it does continually contract all the time while you're running. The other thing is, we all spend a lot of time sitting down, so sitting behind a desk or sitting in a car, and those quads and hip flexors tend to tighten up quite a lot. So sort of an easy or a basic quad stretch is simply standing on one leg. You can hold onto something for balance, bringing your foot up behind your backside, holding onto it with your hand, and then pulling your foot back towards your backside. Make sure you start the stretch by pushing your hips out in front. Okay, so you get not only the quads but also those hip flexors as well. And yeah, just take notice of where you feel tight. It's one thing to sort of give you, a list of stretches to do, but what's going to be most beneficial is you start to notice what's tight for you. You might notice that you have a lot of tightness in the quads, for example, so spend more time on that. Or you might notice that you're really, really tight in the hamstrings and lower back. So that's where you need to focus most of your time on. So when you do your running, just be mindful of what you're feeling. Like I said before, if you feel any little niggles or twinges, take notice of those so that you can sort of take care of them that night or as part of your recovery. And also where you're feeling tight. If your calves tighten up while you're running, that's an indication that you need to work on those. So spend a little bit of time stretching, maybe some foam rolling, massage tool, heat. All those things are really good for recovery and rehabilitation. And it's that stuff that will help you to run consistently. It's always those little niggles that sort of stop people from progressing. So really take notice of those and make sure you work on them.
So your advice would be, if you notice a niggle, hold back on the running a little bit, spend more time focusing on stretching and exercising that part until it feels loose again.
Yeah, for sure. Look, one of the biggest enemies of runners, and particularly male runners, is ego. And we've all suffered from it. None of us are immune to it. I know I've fallen victim to ego many times, and it'll get you into more trouble than anything else. So there's this tendency that, especially as men, that we push through the pain. No pain, no gain. And that's a big mistake. So make sure you check your ego. If you're not feeling it one day, like, take notice of that. Maybe just walk for that day instead of running, or just throw in a few little jogs here and there. Don't be afraid to back off. Don't be afraid to, if you're planning a 5K run and you get 500 meters down the road and you just feel like crap, well, either go for a walk, or cut your run short. Don't let your ego take over. Don't let your ego tell you, I've got a 5K run planned, I have to do it come hell or high water, because that's what's going to get you into trouble. So take notice of how you're feeling, and and adjust your training accordingly. And when you do come across those little niggles or tight spots, or if you find something's tightening up more than it should, then focus on that and spend that time taking care of it.
And I know that either on your website or your YouTube page, you've got hundreds of videos, haven't you? So where would the best place be for people to go to find some of those stretches?
Yeah, for sure. Look, all those stretches that I talked about before, all those muscle groups I talked about before, I've got dozens and dozens of stretches on my website with videos and photographs and detailed descriptions of how to do them. So if you head over to stretchcoach.com and just go to our free article section, you can do a search for calf stretches, and you'll find calf stretches, hamstring stretches, back stretches, whatever you want to work on. And most of the YouTube videos that I've got on YouTube, I put them on my website as well. So most of them are there, sort of embedded in the articles. And there's also some great information on treating injuries as well. So, if you do find that maybe your Achilles is giving you a little bit of grief, just search for Achilles or Achilles injuries. And there's full treatment plans and everything there that you can use to treat just about any running injury that you can think of.
Yeah, I think your website is like the perfect library of any kind of stretch or any injury prevention you can find. Now, one of the reasons why I started this whole project, if you like, and decided I wanted to get fit, was because I had these awful back pains a few years ago, and for a short time I was walking with a little stoop, because I had this SIJ injury, and so I became absolutely terrified of becoming old and being one of these guys who's like shuffling around. And so mobility, I realized it was all to do with poor posture, sitting down too much at the desk, not moving at all, no exercise. I saw a physio, and she told me in no uncertain terms, start running. You need to, you've got awful strength in all of these places where you've just said, in that what did you call it? The back section?
The posterior chain.
The posterior chain. Yeah, my hamstrings, everything, she said, was rotten. And she said, just start running. I mean, here I am a few years later, and I barely noticed the thing at all. At one point, I honestly thought I had to live with this pain forever. It was horrendous. And I think through running, it's obviously strengthened that posterior chain and all of those different areas, and so that I'm moving a lot more freely now. And is that is it how does running improve your mobility? Because for me it really has. Is there truth in that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're all sort of victims of this modern world where we sit behind laptops or sit hunched over a phone, or spend way too much stuck in traffic driving cars. So exactly what you just described, this scenario you get into where that whole back section of your body just becomes weak. You tighten up through the front of your body. You sort of bend forward into this slumped over posture. And that just creates almost like a snowball of different aches and ailments and injuries and all sorts of things. So, running is one of those great activities that, helps on so many different levels. Once you start getting into your running, you will start to develop strength all through that posterior chain. You'll develop strength in areas that, are affected by sitting down all the time. And that's not to mention the other benefits, just, improving your cardiovascular fitness, weight loss, all that sort of stuff as well. So, and then, obviously that leads into your mobility. I mean, running is one of those activities that can tighten those muscles up. As I mentioned before, it is an impact activity. So that impact does tend to constrict the muscles and tighten them up. So mobility is something that you do need to work on separately from running. But yeah, combine running with some mobility training, and like you said before, you'll definitely experience the benefits from it.
Yeah, it was miraculous. If nothing else, I really did have a point where I thought I was going to be like that forever, and she was right. The running really, took that pain away. Well, where it seemed like there was no escape. Brilliant. Thanks very much for your time, Brad. And I won't keep you any longer. But I think for these guys, they've got some really great information now. There's a library of information that they can go and find on your website if they're looking for anything in particular. And so I'd just like to say thanks very much again for your expertise and your time.
Thank you, Mike. It's always a pleasure talking with you. And if anyone does have any more questions or anything, just head over to stretchcoach.com. You can get in touch with me via the contact form there, and more than happy to answer anyone's questions related to running or flexibility or sports injury or anything along those terms.
Excellent. Okay, Brad, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Mike.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.